Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online character build video with me, Sherman. Today guys, I bring you the Swashbuckler Rogue. Very similar to the Stormbuckler, but not quite. So before I get started, of course, disclaimer, this is a roleplay casual play build. It is not meant for meta play. So going into a little bit of the story behind where I came up with this, I'm a huge fan of like Sinbad. And I'm not talking like Sinbad the Disney movie, I'm talking about Sinbad like the classic stuff, like the books, the comic books, the stories that were passed down through the history of this character Sinbad, who was basically a pirate, treasure hunter, all kinds of stuff on the seven seas. And it was just a really cool story. I really loved the concept and the idea behind it. And I like how he went against the gods. He didn't go against them to be bad, but to do things for the greater good of humanity. And it was really cool how he did that. He faced off against a lot of enemy gods in some of the stories. Some stories not so much, but it was just really cool. So that is it for the Swashbuckler Rogue's background. They're basically characters like Sinbad. Okay, so moving on. We are the Swashbuckler Rogue. We are a Wood Elf Templar with this. Now, you can be any race, and I want to get this out of the way. So, the reason I chose the Wood Elf isn't because it makes it better, but because I like Wood Elves, okay? That's it. I like all the races in the game, personally, and I'll play anyone in any role. It doesn't matter. So, I just play the game to have fun. So, like I said, any race can play this, and I'm not going to tell you which one I think would be best at it, because that's not even a factor in my playstyle. So, you can see as this character is primarily a damage dealer because we have 64 points in the stamina. This character can also play a tank and damage dealer, or tank and healer, besides just a damage dealer. So to play this as a damage dealer, you're going to put 64 points in the stamina, always. If you want to play this as a tank, you're going to take the 64 points out of stamina, put as much into health to get you as close to or around 30k as possible, and the rest into stamina. And then if you want to play this as a healer, you're going to take your stamina points completely out of stamina and put everything into magicka. And you might want to change your food too. Alright, so going over our stats with our... starting with our max magicka, we do have 14k max magicka, 19k max health, 31k max stamina, and we have an 1893 health recovery, or mag recovery, 321 health recovery, and a 1456 stam recovery. The reason why Wood Elves work so good with this is because they get a super high stam recovery. Alright, now before I continue on, remember these attribute point pools are to represent this race. If you want to see what other races look like, they all pretty much have the same pools, but some will be different based on what race you choose. Alright, going over the spell damage and weapon damage, you can see we have a 2632 weapon damage, 1607 spell damage, 28% spell crit with a 48% weapon crit. We do have 15,850 spell resist, almost 16k, and we have 15,414 physical resist. This gives us almost 15.5k physical resistance. Very similar to my other character build I did today, but it's a lot of fun to have really good resistances. Alright, moving on. We are using the Thief Mundus Stone primarily for damage dealing. You can use the Lover Mundus Stone with this, and it works out a little bit better, but you don't need it, really. This thing can still pull high damage numbers just because of the way it is. But if you want to play this as a tank, I would suggest using the Lady Mundus Stone. And if you want to play, and they play great off tanks in dungeons or trials, and great tanks in dungeons. And you don't have to equip a sword and shield to play them as a tank. You can do it with dual wield on both bars, like it's set up, or you can actually change to a two-handed dual wield kind of setup. You can pretty much use whatever weapon type you want to tank with this thing. It's crazy. Alright, and then like I said, if you want to play this as a healer, your best option is to use the Atronach Mundus Stone. That's going to give you higher magic recovery rating, and it works out really well. The other one is the Ritual, would work really good. Alright, now going over the food, we are using Dubious Cameron Throne for playing this character because they're primarily a damage dealer as a stamina DPS. So getting that higher max stamina health and stam recovery is really good for this, because it gives you a good amount of resource management on the stamina side. We don't use a lot of magic abilities with this character, but we do have a strong mag recovery. Right, now going over the equipment in our inventory and then onto the sets we have equipped. We have tripods for when we're playing tank. We have Dubious Cameron Throne for when we're playing damage dealer. We have the spell power pots for when we're playing a healer, and the warrior power pots or stamina power pots for when we're playing a damage dealer. Now, if you are going to play anything other than tank with this, you are going to want to use tri-stat food. This will give you the higher health and magicka. Yeah, higher health, magic, and stamina pools for all three resources. This makes you a more effective tank and healer with those setups. Alright, now we're going to go over the monster set and the sets we have equipped, the other sets we have equipped. Starting with the monster set, though, we do have Troll King. Now, a lot of people are going to question this. They're going to be like, it's not a damage set. You'll see why I use Troll King here in a minute. Remember, swashbucklers are adventurers. They're treasure hunters. They seek out different kind of rarities in the world by going and hunting these down. The Troll King set kind of resembles that of the classic Voyage of Sinbad when he takes on the Cyclops, and he has to take the Cyclops' head or eye or something like that. But this kind of fits that same thing, because trolls in this game have 3 eyes. They have 2 small little ones, and they have 1 big one in the middle. And it really fits that whole idea or theory of a Cyclops. So I thought it just fit into the idea of Swashbuckler. Now, the one piece adds healing done, and then when you heal yourself or an ally, if they are still below 50% health, their health recovery is increased by 1548. I will tell you this thing goes off quite a bit, because you do get knocked to 50% health, and other people around you will as well, but you also use a dot and a heal at the same time, a dot heal at the same, that's built into the same skill, so it really plays off of this well, and it makes it really easy to get this to proc. The next set we are using, of course, is Night Mother's Gaze, because we are a rogue type character. We want that higher physical penetration. We want to be able to push our damage, and being a rogue, you're specialized in basically getting through armor, the weak spots of armor, and that's where this armor set comes into play. The 2-piece adds weapon crit, the 3-piece weapon damage, the 4-piece weapon crit, and then the 5-piece. When you deal critical damage, you apply major fracture to the enemy, reducing their physical resistance by 5,280 for 6 seconds. So you get that higher damage output with the character because of that higher penetration value. Alright, moving on to the next set. We are using Bahara's Curse. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, what? Because it's probably something you weren't expecting. But let me go over it real quick. So the 2-piece adds max health, the 3-piece max magicka, the 4-piece max stamina, and then the other 4-piece bonus is when it reduces your damage taken from environmental traps by 40%. Environmental traps are anything that you trigger within a dungeon that is considered a trap. So this could be like falling rocks, different things like that. You will take 40% less damage from. Now the 5-piece bonus is where it gets interesting. When you deal damage, you have a 25% chance to create desecrated ground for 5 seconds, which reduces the movement speed of enemies within by 70%, damages them for X amount of magic damage every 1 second, and heals you for 100% of the damage done. The way I look at it is this is the ultimate treasure hunter setup, because it allows you to avoid traps more effectively or take less damage from them, and it gives you that really good potential to do magic damage plus a heal, and it kind of plays off the fact that the divine gods are helping you. So like in the theory of classic Sinbad, it would have been things like Poseidon or Zeus or those kind of gods would send him out on adventures to seek out lost and ancient relics to stop other gods from getting them, and he would use his special, the special gift he was given to do that. And this kind of plays into that. Like, this is a special set, a gift from the gods that allows him to do that. Alright, now we're going to go over traits and enchants on the gear, starting with the monster set. And like all my builds, guys, if I have a crafted set in there, the chest and the belt are going to be the heavy and light pieces. The rest of it's all medium. So for this, the head, the shoulders, the gloves, the leggings and the boots are all medium, and the chest and the belt are the light and heavy pieces. The light belt with the heavy chest is how we have it set up. Now on the monster set, we are using infused medium helm with a tri-stat enchant. As you can see, the tri-stat enchant gives us just a little bit more oomph to with the infused trait, gives us a little bit more oomph to our multi-stat enchant. So it really allows us to hybridize better, allows us to play all three roles more effectively, and it allows us to take a little bit more advantage of the Magicka resource as well as stamina, especially in those other roles. Now moving on to the shoulders, we are using a Divine's shoulders with a stamina enchant on the enchantment slot, and this allows us to have that greater stamina pool with that good amount of Mundus Stone effect. And now the smaller pieces, and I am going to do this on all of this real quick so we can get this out of the way. The gloves, the belt, and the boots are also set up this way. They're Divine's max stamina. This is so we can take a greater advantage of the Mundus Stone effect, so we can utilize it better in different situations and different roles. Like using the Lady Mundus Stone is going to give us greater resistances because we have 4 Divines. The Atronach Mundus Stone is going to give us greater mag recovery, which is better than the Divine, or better with the Divines. And the same thing goes with what we're using the Thief Mundus Stone for. And then that max stamina just makes our stamina pool that much better and that much more effective. This character plays primarily stamina based very well, but can also tip into Magicka if needed because of the tri-stats. Now on the chest, we are using Reinforced with a tri-stat enchant on a heavy piece of armor. The reason for the heavy piece of armor and Reinforced is this is the one piece of gear out of all the gear pieces you wear that can get this high of resistances, which is 3,215, and this gives you greater survivability overall. The leggings themselves are also infused with the tri-stat enchant. The infused, of course, increases the armor enchantment effect by 20%. That's how we get more stats out of them. And then the tri-stat allows us to hybridize and stuff. Moving on to the jewelry, starting with the 2 rings. We do have 2 rings of Baharia's Curse, both tri-runed, and the tri-rune really plays well with Baharia's Curse because Baharia's Curse also gives you a tri-stat effect. It gives you the health, magic, and stamina pools necessary to play more effectively with all 3 resource types. So the tri-rune plays really well into that on top of it. So, really good. Both of these have weapon damage enchants, and that's to maximize our weapon damage potential to make us more effective damage dealers. But we can also play more effectively as healers too because of the way we have our traits and enchants on our weapons. We'll get to that in a second. Moving on to the final one, we are using an infused necklace with a mag recovery. Now, people are going to question why the mag recovery. Playing this character, when you're not playing them as just a damage dealer, they can also bring a lot of group support as a healer or as a tank. So having that increased recovery really allows you to hybridize into the different roles. Allows you to better play as a healer, better play as a tank. So you've already got this stuff covering your damage output. You need something that's going to offer you some other effect to play the other way. All right. Now moving on to the weapons, starting with the front bar, and yes, this is dual wield on both bars. It is a rogue type, and yes, it is set up sword and dagger on both bars. So the first weapon we are using is a sword, one-handed, with an absorb stamina enchant and sharpen. The sharpen gives us a greater physical and spell penetration, so it plays really well with the Night Mothers. We don't get a lot of spell pen, but that's fine because we're not using spell damage primarily. We're using magic damage, and the only time we use spell damage stuff is when we play with tri-stat food and we want to hybridize our character a little bit more. But this also deals damage on initial hit and restores Magicka because we're using an absorb Magicka enchant. Now people are going to say you can't use this with an absorb stamina enchant as well because they do the same thing. They don't actually, and they actually work in opposite conjunction with each other. That's why in the offhand we are using a Nirnhone weapon with an absorbed stamina enchant. See, the main weapon is going to give you Magicka back every so often. The other one's going to give you stamina back every so often. So this is going to help you keep your resources managed no matter what role you're playing, tank, healer, or damage dealer. The Nirnhone is to increase that offhand damage to 1535, and it also applies to our spell damage as well. As you can see, we have a 1607 spell damage, and that's because we do get increased weapon damage and a little bit of spell damage in there, which is nice. to give us that higher spell damage in there. And that also plays into our back bar, which we're using an infused one-handed sword with a weapon damage enchant. Now this only gives you a smaller enchant bonus for the weapon and spell damage, but it winds up balancing out in the long run because you are also using Nirnhone in the offhand here as well. But we'll get to that. The weapon and spell damage enchant increases your weapon and spell damage by X amount for 5 seconds. The infused enchant basically increases the enchantment's effect and its cooldown. So it's no longer 5-second cooldown, it actually has a 3-second cooldown. Well, technically 2.5, but because of the way the game calculates things in seconds, the 2.5 comes up to 3 seconds in total. Every 3 seconds this is going to proc this thing, and the way we have our character set up, we can proc this every 3 seconds for a pretty long time. Alright, moving on to the next ability, or the next tool, our offhand sword or dagger, Bahara's Curse, Nirnhone, again with an absorb stamina. The reason for the 2 absorb staminas is this way it allows you to effectively keep your stamina coming in no matter what bar you're on, and no matter what enchant or proc you have going on. You're always going to get that stamina back every 5 seconds, no matter what. So this plays really well with this. Alright, now that I've shown you this, we're going to go over skills real quick. Starting with class skills, I do take every stamina morph with this class. So every stamina morph within the class is set to be stamina based. But I do unlock every class ultimate, active ability, and passive, so I can take advantage of those skills and passives for any role I'm playing, whether I'm playing a tank, a healer, or a damage dealer. I can take advantage of all the class passives and every single one of the class abilities and ultimate to play the roles more effectively. When moving on to weapons, we primarily use dual wield with this, and the reason why I primarily use dual wield is it fits the swashbuckler theme. A lot of times you don't see pirates using bows, or sailors using bows. You see them using 2 swords, or a sword and dagger, or an axe and dagger, thing like that. So it kind of I wanted it to really reflect that idea of this rogue swashbuckler type. So that's where it comes from. But we do unlock the ultimate active abilities and passives here as well, so we can use those to our advantage in the different roles. Also, you can learn restoration stuff if you want to play a more effective healer, and if you want to play a more, I'm not going to say effective tank, but a better tank, you can use sword and shield. Alright, or you can use ice staff on the back bar, your choice. Now moving on to armor, we are going to take all the top 3 light armor passives, and that's because the bottom 2 we can't use because it requires 5 or more pieces of light armor, but we can take advantage of all these and still get them to work with our character, because they do offer us different benefits that play well into our character, and we do wear 1 piece of light for this purpose, as well as another one which I'll get to later. Medium armor, we're going to take all the passives and the active ability. The active ability I've used in PvP a lot, because it also can remove, or it makes my major evasion last longer than anything else, any other skill I have, so it really helps. And then I take all the passives, of course. And then heavy armor, we do the same thing. We take the top 3 passives because the bottom 2 are related to having 5 or more pieces equipped. World skills, soul magic. We do take the ultimate active ability and the first passive as optional choices. I do use them, so I take them all the time. And then I always take the bottom 2, soul summons and soul lock. Now when it comes to guild skills, Fighters Guild, Mages Guild, and Psijic Order Guild, I do take all the active abilities and passives here because I do use these skills in different situations, different roles, and basically different environments of the game. So if I'm playing PvP, I use different skills from each of these trees depending on the role I'm playing. If I'm playing a tank, a healer, or damage dealer. If I'm playing PvE Overland, same thing. It works in retrospect there with PvE Overland, Dungeons, and Trials. Moving on to Undaunted, I do take the Undaunted active abilities, all of them, because they are synergies, and I can use these within my group to help bring more dynamics to our play. On top of that, I take both passives, and there's a reason for this. The Undaunted Metal is really good. Because we wear 1 piece of light and 1 piece of heavy with the 5 medium, we get 6% increase to our stat pool. And that's what I was talking about. I would tell you guys later on the reason why we take the different passives for the armor and stuff like that. It's because of this. And moving on to Alliance War, assault skills. I take the skills that best not reflect my ability to play PvE, but work best in PvE. So I take Aggressive Warhorn, Resolving Vigor, and Caltrops on the front bar. This allows me to play with those skills in PvE and be more effective. The same thing goes with support. I take the ultimate 2 active abilities here, Efficient Purge and Stalwart Guard, and Magic Aid to offer support to my allies in PvE. Racial, we are Wood Elf. Now remember, you could be any race with this. It doesn't matter. Wood Elf just happen to be the one I picked for this particular setup. And we get Hunter's Eye. This increases our stealth detection radius by 3%. And we also get increase your movement speed by 10% and your physical and spell penetration by 1500 for 6 seconds after you use a roll dodge. So I use roll dodging a lot, mainly to get behind the enemy. So when I'm fighting on a boss encounter and the tank has aggro, I will stay behind the boss so I can do the maximum amount of damage. But I also use a lot of dodge rolling so I can get that higher penetration value. Alright, moving on to Ifri's Endurance. This is a great one. Increase your stamina recovery by 258. And then we have Resist Affliction, which increases your max stamina by 2,000 and poison resistance by 2310. You also gain immunity to the poison status effect. I want to be clear on this so people understand how these immunity things work and the resistance things work. So since this is poison damage, it actually applies to your physical resistance. So remember, my physical resistance is 15,000. If somebody hits me with a poison damage ability that does poison damage and doesn't apply the poison status effect, that's actually going to be reduced by almost 18,000 resistances right out the door. Because if I don't have my buff up. If I have my buff up, I go to 23,000 and then I get an extra 2,310. So I go to 26,000 spell or poison resistance. The immunity means that you are immune to any poison status effect that is somebody tries to apply to you. So if they're using a poison enchant on an infused weapon to try to proc poison on you, it will not apply that poison status effect. They can just do the poison damage, and that's going to be reduced by a lot because of our Resist Affliction. Moving on to Crafting, Alchemy, Medicinal Use. This is a really good one to get. When using potions, resulting effects last 30% longer. And then Provisioning, Gourmand, and Connoisseur. Both of these make your food and drinks last 20 minutes longer. Now I'm going to go over the skills on my bar really quick. And then we're going to talk about CP. And then I'm going to show you a couple parses. And we're going to go into a dungeon. So the first ability we have is called Blood Craze. This does X amount of damage up front, X amount of damage over 10 seconds. And it heals you every 2 seconds for the duration. And before I get asked, yes, I know I use Blood Craze and I use the Rending Slashes. It depends on how I have my ability set up and which ones I'm using on which one of these I use. So, which morph I use. Right, next ability we have is called Steel Tornado. This is our AoE spammable. So this is our single target damage ability, damage over time ability. This is our AoE spammable. So if you're fighting a lot of monsters in one area, you will spam this. Otherwise, you just activate it once against one target. And what it does is you spend dealing X amount of physical damage to nearby enemies. Next ability we have is called Biting Jabs. This deals X amount of damage in 4 consecutive hits to your main target at a greater amount and to your other targets at a lesser amount, but it still hits 4 consecutive times for both things. We also can proc our Burning Light passive from the Aedric Spear line, which, by the way, when you deal damage with an Aedric Spear ability, you have a 25% chance to deal an additional X amount of physical damage, X amount of magic damage, whichever is higher. This effect can occur every 0.5 seconds. The damage of this passive scales off your max stamina and weapon damage, or your max spell damage and spell damage. So that's really nice. We can get that extra proc of damage in there. The next thing we have is called Ritual of Retribution. This is how you get Troll King to proc, but you keep this on the front bar because you want this to be that ability that you use last so you can get that Troll King to proc. You want to take those hits and damage. So it works out. But this basically what it does is it cleanses you of 2 harmful effects right away when you cast it, and then it will also heal and do damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds, and allies in the area can activate the Purify Synergy, cleansing all harmful effects and healing themselves for X amount. Alright, next one is called Shrouded Daggers. This one is a really cool ability. Unlike the shards, spear shards, or whatever it's called, not spear shards, the silver shards from the Fighters Guild line, this works very similar. You basically throw a dagger at a target, it will hit them, dealing X amount of damage, and they'll bounce to another target, dealing X amount of damage, and to a third target, dealing X amount of damage. So it hits 3 targets in total, dealing greater damage each time it hits. It also grants you major brutality, increasing your weapon damage by 20% for 20 seconds. Now, this ability happens to be one that you can float out with things like luminous shards and other stuff. We'll get into that later in another video probably. But let's go ahead and move on. Next is our ultimate Rend. Now this one, you slash an enemy in front of you, dealing X amount of physical damage over 16 seconds and healing yourself for 57% of the damage done. This is a really great, oh crap, ultimate. It's really cheap too, it's 144. Not quite as cheap as Dawnbreaker, but it works out really well. Now moving on to the back bar. Starting with our first ability, we do have Rearming Trap. This deals X amount of physical damage when the trap triggers. It does take 1.5 seconds for it to be active once you cast it to become activatable to where it does that damage up front, and then it will deal additional damage over 6 seconds, immobilize the enemy for 6 seconds if they can be immobilized, and it will grant you minor force, increasing your critical damage by 10%. After being triggered, the trap resets itself and can be triggered one more time. Alright, moving on to the next ability, we have Power of the Light. This basically, when you cast this, it will put a physical damage on the enemy right away, and a beam of light with a spear basically coming down through that beam of light really slowly. As it's doing that, it's copying all the damage that it's taking for 6 seconds and releasing 20% of it as additional physical damage to the enemy. Now this does not proc Burning Light, but it can do a maximum damage copied of 18,720. And targets are also afflicted with minor fracture and minor breach, reducing their physical and spell resistance by 1320. So you not only do you get the sharpen effect, the major fracture, but you also get minor fracture and minor breach. So you get that higher spell pen from the dual from the sharpen weapon and this, and then you get that higher physical pen from 3 different things, which is really nice. Moving on to the next ability we have is called Razor Caltrops, and this one basically you throw out a handful of caltrops that explode in the sky, dealing X amount of damage when you throw it out on the initial hit. It'll explode and deal damage, and then afterwards it will deal X amount of damage every second for 12 seconds and reduce the enemy movement speed by 30%. Our next ability we have is called Quick Cloak. Now this is a really great ability. A lot of people don't use this, but it gives you major evasion for 15 seconds. Or a lot of people use this, but they don't use this morph. So this one gives you 15 seconds of major evasion, reducing damage from area attacks by 25%. And then every 3 seconds, the shrapnel will pulse, dealing X amount of physical damage to all enemies within 5 meters. This is how we keep our proc of our one set active all the time, or our one enchant active all the time, as we use this ability because it's a weapon damage ability and it will proc your enchants on the back bar. Moving on to the next ability, we have our Restoring Focus. Now this gives you Major Ward and Major Resolve, increasing spell and physical resist by 5,280. You also recover 240 stamina every second, and then standing within the ruin increases physical and spell resistance by 50%. Our last ability is another ultimate, and it is called Solar Disturbance. This one does X amount of damage every second for 10 seconds, and then it also applies Major Maim to the enemy, reducing their damage done by 30%. Major Maim persists on enemies that they leave the Nova for 6 seconds, and an ally near it can activate the Supernova Synergy, dealing X amount of magic damage to all enemies around it, the sphere, and stunning them for 2.5 seconds. Alright, now moving on to our champion level stuff. Starting with the red tree, we have 56 in Ironclad. This reduces damage taken from direct damage attacks by 20%. We have 34 in medium armor focus, increasing physical resistance while wearing 5 pieces or more of medium armor by 2,980. And then we have 4 in a spell shield, which just gives us a little bit more spell resist. That keeps us above our physical resist by 413. And then moving on over to the middle red tree, we have 31 into thick skin, reducing your damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. We have 43 into hardy, reducing your damage taken from physical poison disease damage by 10%. And then 43 in elemental defender, which reduces your damage taken from flame, frost, shock, and magic damage by 10%. Moving on to the final red tree, we have 40 into Bastion, increasing the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing your healing received by 5%. And then moving on to the green tree, we have 40 into Warlord, which reduces your break free cost by 16%. 16 into Sprinter, reducing sprint cost by 10%. And 16 into Bashing Focus, reducing bash cost by 10%. Moving on to the final, or to the middle green tree, we have 75 into Mooncalf. This increases your stam recovery by 14%. And then we have 43 into Arcanist to increase our mag recovery by 10%. Moving on over here, we have 40 into Tumbling, reducing your dodge roll cost by 16%. We have 40 into Shadow Ward, reducing block cost by 16%. Moving on to the middle tree, we are primarily a stamina damage dealer, so we only put 43 into Bless. This is going to increase our healing done by 10%. If you want to make this more effective healer when you're playing the healer side, you can put in Elfborn and Elemental Expert as well by taking points out of other areas. In the middle tree, and this is a tree I would not take from, I would leave this as is, your Physical Weapon Expert, we have 35 points in here. This increases your damage done with light and heavy attacks with two-handed, one-handed and shield, dual wield, and bow weapons, as well as in werewolf form by 20%. Yes, this thing can play a werewolf just fine. I wouldn't play it as a vampire. Kind of sucks. I mean, it works, but it sucks at the same time. Master at Arms, 40 points. This increases your direct damage done by 16%. And then moving on to the final blue tree, we have 56 in the Mighty, increasing your physical poison disease damage done by 12%. We also have 56 in the Precise Strikes. This increases your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities by 20%. And then 40 in the Master at Arms, increasing your damage done with damage over time effects by 16%. Alright. Now that I've shown you guys the CP and everything, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do two quick parses. One on this small skeleton down here, and this is to represent your damage in a dungeon. And then one on the big guy over there that represents your damage in a trial with a really organized group. So we're going to go ahead and do this real quick. We're going to pull up our potions, we're going to drop our debuff, or our buff, and then we're going to just go through the abilities. And as you can see, we deal about 23k damage. If I can get a good rotation on this, I can get up to about 26, 28 on the little guy. Now we're going to go over here and we're going to mess with this big guy. And this big guy is made for organized groups. And I want to explain this so people understand. This thing gives you every buff imaginable in the game. And there is no way you're going to have a group with every buff imaginable in the game, because nobody runs here scenes very much in groups. Worm Cult is used, but mostly by healers in trials and not by anyone else. And then all the other benefits like Major Courage, Minor Courage, and all these other things that aren't accounted for by this are missing, but then it has a lot of things that are there, like the Major Courage. So this gives you every possible buff from every class as well. So like the Minor Brutality, Minor Sorcery, Minor Prophecy, and Minor, what is that called? The Minor Savagery. So you get all that as well. So let's go ahead and do the rotation real quick. And in this, I will use a couple of ultimates. And if I can get the rotation to actually work, I can actually get this up to about 32 to 35k DPS. As you can see right there, I got it up to about 32. I can get to 35 sometimes. The highest I've done with this thing on a parse on that big guy was a 38k DPS, which isn't bad. That's actually really good. So, alright, so that's the damage aspects of this. Now we're going to go ahead and jump over to a dungeon. But before we do, we are going to change a few things here. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Let me go ahead and do this again. We're going to go ahead and change out the throwing blades and the biting jabs. We're going to move over. And what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to the guilds. Actually, yeah, we're going to go to the... No, let's go ahead and use the class. We'll just use the class's shield. We're going to go ahead and use the class's shield from Adric Spearline, Blazing Spear, our blazing shield, and we're going to keep that along with the other abilities we have here on our bar, so we can play this character as a damage dealer and a solo build inside of a dungeon. And the dungeon we will be testing in is Depths of Malatar. Pretty much everyone who watches my channel will know this. Right now we're doing the Depths of Malatar. In the next update, which is coming to PTS next week, I will be using the other dungeons from that PTS, from that testing, from that new content, as one of them will be the test one for testing the builds in normal play. Right, so as soon as I get in here, I'm going to go ahead and take off towards the first room so we can get started with showing you this thing's effectiveness in small group combat. And you can either say this works like this in PvE Overland or in delves and public dungeons and all that, but it's actually different in those environments on how the resistances and things work with the enemies. So. And you can see like that, because it was like a lot of ads, I used the AoE instead of the other one. Now, if you guys didn't see that, I was actually throwing a light attack in between every one of those spins there. So, right, let's go find the big cheese himself. There he is. He's hiding over there. Block this. I need to stop fighting him, or I will take him into his fear state, and he will run away. So we're going to let him go ahead and kill us, and that way you guys can say, okay, I believe you. Alright, well, this build works really well, and it's one that I find really fun, and I was actually tempted to make one of my characters into this, but my characters are already set on the live server how I want to set them up and how I want to play them, so unfortunately I will not be playing this on the live server. I would like to. But that's it for the Swashbuckler Rogue, guys. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, I want to thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.